Hello, everyone. Welcome to the School of Art and Design at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. It's a pleasure to be here one more time. This is the third moving the conversation to the schools we are having. We started this with two shaky issues. Now we have the printed versions with COVID. We can share the links and we select articles that we discuss in sessions. I will ask very quickly to introduce the first group discussions, and that is the paper of Karel van der Waarde, Sheila Pontis, Meredith Davis, and Claire. Meredith and Claire are going to be discussing the paper with them. I will ask, before that, I will ask Jan Necker to share with us the event that is part of this conversation today that is organized with the master students. So can you please share that with us?
Yes, thank you, Gise. Hello, everyone. It's very nice being here tonight. And we just had our 10th Junior Research Conference. That is a conference held with all the MA students in design across Switzerland. And today we had most likely the biggest Junior Research Conference ever, with more than 220 participants. And some of them also joined the panel discussion tonight with you. So I'm very happy that some of the people moved over from our virtual apéro that is just going on. And if some of the participants here are interested in knowing more about the conference, there is a website called juniorresearch.ch. I just shared that on the chat, or maybe we need to share that with others as well. Here we go. And the good thing about that website is it doesn't only inform about the conference itself, it also holds the database of all the MA projects in design ever conducted, research project in Switzerland in about 10 to 12 years time now. So it's worth taking a look. There's a new Explore section on that website where you can also have some data visualizations about subjects being treated, the age, gender, and schools of the MA students. And it's a great resource to get to know about design research education in Switzerland. Thank you for being here tonight. And now I'm handing over to you back to Gise.
Thank you, Jan. Just a reminder, as the previous sessions, please, if you have questions, and they will be great, they are very welcome. Right then in the Q&A is a button that you will find at the bottom, almost right of your screen. And we might not answer immediately. We will get sometimes. If the panelists are discussing, we will read and then get the question to them. They can see it anyway. So don't worry, we will read the questions, but it's easier if you put the questions just in the Q&A and not in the Q&A and the chat. So as I was saying before, I will invite Karel, Sheila, Meredith, and Claire. Please introduce yourself briefly, your name, and the position you have right now. Thank you.
Do I start?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Ladies first. I'm Karel van der Voort. I'm doing three things. I'm doing research in the pharmaceutical area, pharmaceutical medicines, and the information about that. I teach in Swinburne in Melbourne, Loughborough University in England, and Basel School of Design in Switzerland.
Sheila?
Thanks, Meredith. I'm Sheila Pontis. I'm professional specialist and lecturer in design and creativity at Princeton University, and I'm also a partner at Sense Information Design. It's a design consultancy in the New York area.
I'm Meredith Davis. I'm an emerita professor at North Carolina State University College of Design, and since retiring, I'm now in full-time writing and consultation.
Claire?
I'm Claire. I'm a bachelor student from the program Design Management International at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. I'm currently in my senior year and I'm aiming for a career in design research.
Good. And you also work in the competence centers for design and management.
Exactly, yes.
Mobile direct. Good, fantastic. Meredith or Claire, do you have a question or comment about the article of Karel and Sheila?
Yes, a number of questions, but I'll start with this one. You talk a lot about problem framing and describe that as having elements that include problems, people, context, content, and solution. And the typical pedagogy in design education programs has faculty framing problems for the most part until students get to a capstone experience, and then they've had very little kind of experience in framing them themselves and frequently define the project in terms of something they want to make rather than a problem. So can you talk about how students come to understand these challenges under a pedagogy of self-direction, and more specifically, how they determine whether challenges represent the core of a problem or simply a symptom of a much larger issue?
Wonderful question. Shall I start, Sheila? Thank you for this question. It is absolutely bang on in the center of graphic design, visual communication, teaching at the moment. Graphic designers, visual communicators, information designers are trained to make things, and they should be trained to make things that communicate. And if you focus on the things that communicate, then the things that we teach them at the moment show exactly your problem. Students are making things and just stop there. They never test, they never figure out if they solve a real problem. The way to solve that, and the way we're trying to solve that in Basel and in Princeton, is to take students out of the studio, leave the studio, start talking to other people outside the design realm. And that means they get in contact with pharmacists, and they get in contact with patients, and they get in contact with people who struggle to fill in a financial form, or people who struggle to vote. And then you tackle immediately the core of graphic design problems. So the easiest way to get students into contact with problems that are fundamental for society is to let them leave the studio right in the first year and let them observe how people struggle with real information in real practice. And based on that, they can start solving real problems.
Just to add to that, I think also probably traditionally students were used to being given a problem, and they were not used to questioning whether the problem was a problem, and they were just going into, let's solve this that was given to me. I think the more we can encourage students to take a step back once they are given a problem, and to try to first question whether the problem is a problem, either by going into the world, talking with people, understanding what the problem is about, what are the different components, and that's going to help them realize whether the problem could be reframed, whether the problem has to be looked from a different perspective, whether actually they should be looking into something completely different. So it's less about telling them what to do and more about teaching them, go and explore what's going on outside, and then identifying what different aspects you could start addressing.
Mm-hmm. Well, another characteristic I think of beginning designers and students is that they understand that there's some front-end research that has to be done. But in the sense of Riddle's description of wicked problems, the problem really emerges across time simultaneously with working on it. So how do you keep students engaged in that kind of ongoing question and research throughout the problem, as opposed to trying to get just a set of user characteristics at the front end?
I think research should, we are all used to either conducting research at the beginning to understand who the audience is, or at the very end of the process to test whether what we have done as designers is effective or not. To me, research has to be in parallel to the design process. There are many different opportunities where students can test or can have a dialogue with the world to determine whether what they are doing is in line with what they should be addressing. Mm-hmm. So they shouldn't be like, I design now, research is over there. I think it has to be much more integrated in order to not kind of get surprises at the end. It's not like And also the students should, or we need to probably make a better job or do a better job to teach students how they can integrate their learnings from research into the design process. Many of my students do great research and then they forget about that, and then they start designing and they never apply what they learn into the process. So that's another way that we can help them integrate both things.
And that has direct consequences on the way we assess people at the end of the process. It is not so much, can you make a nice end result and design a nice end result? It is, how far have you developed your ideas, and how far did you make any steps forward in a combination of design and research? And it can be a minor step in the research part or a minor step in the design part. But as long as there is some progress, we can assess it. And it's not so much the final result needs to be a shiny, glimmery, shiny thing at the end of a degree show. It might be just a whatever small report stating what needs to be designed. And that means that design, graphic design, visual communication is a lot broader than what we teach at the moment.
I have a great follow-up question for that. So from a student's perspective, when conducting continuously research and testing, how or when do we know that we reached a point of saturation?
Perfect. Thank you for that question. It's brilliant. In Basel, we start very simple and say, look, you have to make progress for one user, one person in one particular activity that you have to achieve, that has to be done. So we take one particular user and for one activity. So one user must be able to, vote accurately. Then we start making it more difficult. We say, look, there's different kinds of people. We expand the story and say, look, you have to go from different types of users, elderly, young people, visually handicapped, non-native speakers, and you can extend the project as much as you like. And that means that you can actually, the research that you have to do for all these different projects extend far past 3 years. You can't do that during a bachelor's degree. We have to limit it during the degree to one user or two users or 5 users, 5 different ones. And then when you come into real practice, we've got to take the whole society into account. But if you've been practicing and learning that there are different ways of looking at graphic design, and that no two people look at the same thing in the same way, in an identical way, through testing, through research, then you know already a hell of a lot more than most graphic designers do.
Just to add to that, Claire, I think also is planning in advance. If you're going to run a study, if you know you're going to be conducting some research and you know it's going to be a qualitative study, I'm going to talk with 5 people. You talk with those 5 people first, or you conduct you use any other method that you want to find out, to gather data. You analyze that, you go back to the design process, you do what you have to do. If you find that you need to test or you gather more information, you have to design something, another study again with X amount of people. So it's not like you're going just to start gathering data and wait for something to tell you when to end. It's requiring some planning in advance. This is going to be my sample. So it's just determining that, how many people you want. Sometimes you target or you aim for 20 and you only gather 10, you stop at 10. But it's taking you, don't let research run the show. You are the one who is in charge of gathering the data.
Yeah, and when we talk about extending research, and despite doing ethnographic research, also scientific research or reviewing scientific research is a big part of design. So I was wondering, do you see the increased volume or growth of scientific research body as a barrier for students when conducting research? Or do you perceive it as an advantage because there is more information available?
Thank you again. Go ahead, Sheila.
No, I wouldn't see it as a barrier. It just, I mean, I would like to better understand why you differentiate ethnographic research from scientific research, because ethnographic research could probably be scientific. It depends on, I mean, to me are the same thing, unless you mean experimental and ethnographic, which yes, there are 2 different types of research, otherwise it's the same. I could never see research as a barrier. It would add more time to the process altogether, yes, because it's one more task that you have to be involved. But I think that also adds to the quality of the overall output, to the learning experience, and also you invite the audience input into the whole process. So I don't think it's a barrier. I don't know,
So,
Karel, if you have
yeah,
a different
no, I don't think it's a problem. It just shows how complex visual communication actually is. It's not a superficial thing. But if you want to talk to doctors and pharmacists and people who are outside the medical or outside the design realm, you have to know their views and their perspectives on visual information. And that is a scientific approach. They talk in articles to each other. And we, as designers, if you want to talk to a pharmacist in the medical world and to medical specialists, you must be able to speak their language before you can actually design something. So you must be aware of the difficulties and the structures and the academic background of some of it that is related to visual communication. But you don't have to read the whole medical literature to actually get to start talking. It is a matter of finding the balance. And most people are amazingly helpful if you say, look, I'm not very confident in your area. Can you tell me what your views are? And based on those views, you can actually start redesigning. So you mean this, or do you mean that? And then based on that, you can start testing on involving users, involving patients, involving students, involving the electorate, involving taxpayers, again, in improving the stuff we make for them.
We have two questions. One is for Martin Wittmar, our Vice Dean Research. And he's asking, you are talking a lot about research. It would be useful to clarify what you mean with that term in your different contexts.
That was similar to my question before. I don't remember exactly. I think we were talking in a general way. We need more context to answer that question. But usually when I talk about research, I talk about ethnographic field research. So human-centered research rather than quantitative or market research. So anything that means going out into the field and talking with people, observing people in their natural environments, workspaces, shopping centers, wherever they are doing, and also any other anthropologic or sociologic type of research method that designers can creatively adapt to test designs or concepts, or to try to explore who the audience is and understand their needs and behaviors. That was my research, or my understanding of research. I don't know if you were referring to a different one.
Karel?
It is very hard to give a very brief definition of, because it needs to include academic scientific research. It needs to include design research, and it needs to include some sort of practical research. I think Ken made always make a comparison to the medical world. He says diagnostic research, which is to do with one patient, some sort of clinical research, which has got to do with a range of patients in a particular situation. And you've got these academic research looking at fundamental issues of human illnesses and human situations. I think that might be really useful to do that. Most of the design research is diagnostic, and some of it is clinical. There's very little fundamental research in design, in visual design, in visual communication.
Meredith, would you like to say something about that?
Well, yes, and I think there's a difference between research that helps you make design decisions as a practitioner or someone, you know, in a particular setting, and research that's intended to build theory and kind of larger principles that the field can build upon across time by other kinds of research. So, you know, it's important to understand what standards of evidence are in these different types of application, to understand methods and things like sample size, how many people should we be talking to. I think those differ based on the kinds of things that you're trying to develop in those two different types of settings. I think also, you know, you're looking in many cases at the nature of relationships. The complexity of problems today really are not so much about the elements themselves, but how they interact. So you're looking at people, activities, settings, all of the forces that come together in those. And one of the tasks, I think, is how do you scale the problem, the research problem? And students have to do a lot of work at kind of figuring out what the boundaries of an investigation should be. and where they kind of draw the line and say that's outside of the problem. It's a force I have to look at. I have to understand the contextualization of my task within that larger context. But there are certain things I'm not going to study in this particular situation. So I think there's a lot of work to be done at the front end of any experience for students in kind of looking at that scope, and then the focus on this kind of interaction of forces and objects and people and settings to really understand what the research problem is. That raises another question for me of the authors. It has to do with the shift in the nature of information design. And as we get more complex, more systems-oriented problems, and you can see this reflected in the kind of work that is projected for the future, very little of it in print-based graphic design and the kind of traditional forms, much more in networked communication and software development. We have to start thinking about the volume, veracity, velocity, and volatility of information. And some of the Neurath, Tufte principles about information design don't accommodate that kind of shift in information today. So how do you deal with that in your conversations with students and thinking about the kind of future of information design in an era of big data?
Sheila?
I honestly,
Go ahead.
I don't think I teach the students based on the type of solution they have to work on. I think it's just first understanding what the problem involves. If it is a problem that would involve digital technologies, we have to see how we tackle that. We are also moving a lot from the designer working in isolation and having to learn everything about digital, everything about, I don't know, healthcare, or everything about whatever topic, quantum computing, for example, one of the topics my class was working on, and more towards working in collaboration with experts on those domains. So the designer brings the mindset and the skill sets, for example, visual thinking, mapping, and then executing solutions, but relies a lot on the other students that actually know more about digital technologies, in this case, quantum computing or whatever they are working on. So I think I would just like encourage the students to really learn about what the problem is about, identify the key component parts, understand the connections, and start thinking about what types of solutions they could create. They're also moving towards more tailored type of solutions, that one size fits all type of solution that 20 years ago was you have to design something that helps everyone in the world. And I don't think that applies anymore. Once you start identifying the needs, you start seeing much more nuanced type of potential solutions and that they could create. Yeah. I don't know, Karel, if you have any other insight?
No, but it starts from the idea that students are not capable yet to deal with the volume and the veracity and the velocity and the volatility of information. And as far as I've talked to students, even first years can see in the university websites and in the university they've got to log into many different systems to get to their timetables and to upload work and to see the module information and talk to each other through different systems. They do that a hell of a lot faster than I do. And so they are very, very well aware of shifting between and see what's relevant and what's not for their own work. And if they do that, the same approach. Recently we had a discussion somewhere that we shouldn't talk about readers of people or users. That is really, we don't have a good word in the English language for people who look at visual information. Until somebody said, we designed for skimmers. People skim information all the time. And you skim at an amazing speed to see what's relevant and what's not relevant. And students are very well capable of doing that. And if we start from that idea that people skim information, and that's applicable to the 95-year-old who looks at her iPhone as well. She skims information, and the speed that we can go through our mailbox, either digital or the real mailbox, and chuck out stuff that we don't need and the stuff that is relevant for us, is amazing. And we're using that. We should use that quality of dealing with a hell of a lot of information by designing for it. So we start from the user's perspective. We build on their strength and make sure that people can skim as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible. And based on that, we can start building election forms or information for diabetic patients, or it doesn't matter what. But that might be the approach that I would suggest, to deal with large amounts of information with variable truth that comes with high speed and change it very quickly.
Mm-hmm. We have a very interesting comment from Ken in the chat. He said, an opposite thought. Ken, would you like to read it yourself?
Unmute, yeah. Not opposite, apposite. An apposite thought.
Sorry.
Someone mentioned that Riddle points out that one of the issues about research is that as you develop any kind of research project, new information is always coming around and changing your research question as you work. And what I wrote to the other panelists was simply, this is the case in many, many fields, because as you work through any kind of research question that deals with the empirical world, and nearly any kind of research question in philosophy, answers are always changing what you've learned so far. And a tremendous example of this, I'll post it to everybody, appears in Herbert Bloomer's chapter on the methodology of symbolic interactionism. I've posted it to academia. Scribd is still transcribing it, so if you wait till the meeting is over, it'll probably be available. And at any rate, it talks about a lot of these issues. I used to, when I used to have research students who would decide they wanted to use a symbolic interactionist perspective, in fact, they would usually come back to me after about a month and say that this was driving them crazy because it was like trying to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a rowboat, gathering all the material, using this kind of broad symbolic interactionist approach to try and understand what was going on. So every now and then for some problems, I would say, well, you know, you can always try grounded theory. And then they'd go back and they'd apply classical grounded theory, trying to put everything into these little boxes. And of course, the trick of grounded theory is that it is a way of quantizing symbolic interactionist research. But then you've got all these millions of little categories you fill in, and then they'd come back and they'd say, oh, this is driving me crazy. And there's all these millions of little category boxes you got to fill in. And I said, well, this is the problem with the world. Either you can cross the ocean in a rowboat without oars, or you can spend all your time trying to fill in boxes, but there's no way around it. Doing research in the world about actual things that happen between and among people in the world is difficult. There's no easy way. So what Riddle was talking about, and this doesn't even involve wicked problems necessarily. So Riddle's one example, but I think this applies to any kind of research where you need to find out how people feel about anything, how people behave, how people interact. Anyhow, read the Bloomer chapter. It's tremendous.
Thank you. Meredith, would you like to add something?
Does Sabine want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was listening in on this conversation now about research, and as a researcher, I'm describing myself as a designer and design researcher, often a design researcher first, so that people don't ask me if, you know, I just designed another piece of t-shirt or something. I wonder if research is just really not a very helpful term sometimes when we talk about it in the context of education. And actually Claire she's already nodding, and I'm wondering if Claire wants to chime in on that eventually, because I wonder if we shouldn't just, but I mean, a suggestion would be to think of our work as an inquiry, you know, and that is linked to curiosity. And we have a curiosity, you know, around a certain interaction, around a certain problem. We want people, I mean, the information design has come up. Obviously, we want the right information at the right time, in the right place, in the right format for the appropriate person that we're trying to reach and support or enable, empower. And in order to that, we need a certain curiosity that often goes beyond what we in our own life experience as common and normal. And that, again, it's a curiosity which then ends up venturing into an inquiry. And you can describe that as a research, but if we are taking a term as research, and we've seen it tonight, then somebody starts saying, well, but that's literature research. Oh, that is, you know, research into the practical aspect. This is material research. This is, I mean, they're all different elements, but as designers, we know we have to bring that together. And so to me, that has always been a strength. And I have said it so many times. I actually just had a conversation with the head of the European Design Association about this, because again, they have for long perceived themselves as a practical organization focusing on practitioners. And she's with me that design and practical design and research in design goes hand in hand. We don't, you know, it's like a scaffolding. If you build a sculpture and the sculpture is the practice, then you need still the scaffolding around it so you can get higher with the structure. And then at some point you need to build the scaffolding, and at some point you need to build the sculpture inside the scaffolding. And it doesn't work without one or the other. So that to me is why I struggle when we start to decipher research and then we dissect it in these different elements. Perhaps we avoid it altogether and talk about inquiry, curiosity, and a purpose centered on the people and the task at hand. Claire, I'm happy for you to chime in if you have any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, Claire and Saul, perhaps you can help us see from your perspective, see the problem from your perspective.
Yeah, I can only agree with what Sabine just said. Also about the curiosity, I think that's an essential trait in order to understand the user and to really evolve a sensitivity of their needs. And I also think that this totally matches what you have wrote in your paper with this testing loop. Doing research, go out there, see how they do what they do, and so on, and to generate somehow this feedback loop will also then enhances the curiosity to go deeper, to go beyond the meta level.
Yeah, I fully agree. I really like the word inquiry because it really suits all sorts of purposes. On the other hand, I think we should also have, apart from that, as a second stream, design research that finds out the basics of what designers do and what design can actually achieve, and the different comparison of different design processes in different disciplines and all sorts of fundamental studies. And I think that the fundamental difference between the two is the inquiry does not need to be repeatable. You don't have to get repeatable information. If you do the research, it's absolutely essential that it is repeatable. And so that's a fundamental issue. With the inquiry, it's more difficult in the academic life to survive. With the research, it is the only way to survive. And we need to separate the two a little bit to make sure that we keep talking about the same things. Using different words really helps there. Thank you. Yeah.
Joel, did you want to say something before? I have a direct comment on Karel, but I don't want to cut you off if you want to say something.
I don't have too much to say other than it just makes me think of what Ken said about boxes or going in a rowboat, that like wanting to be able to box all the different elements of research of material research of this kind of research versus inquiring can encapsulate so much more. So it's just making me think a lot. I think it's good. I don't have too much to add. Go ahead, Sabine.
Yes, thanks, Karel. I just want to pick up on your comment on design research, because of course I'm absolutely with you on that, and I have striven in my own work very much to build on that foundation, to provide an aspect of what it is that we can, identify as design approach and so on. But I would actually underline and say that no practitioner will be able to move beyond the common into a novel, innovative ground without understanding these basic foundations in design research. If you cannot understand the design approach that people you're working with are applying, if you cannot identify the design principle that they are working with, the design methods that they're using and the ones that they aren't, and the processes and the practices, I think you will have a hard time actually venturing out into new field. And so it is a foundation for the practice as well. So I just didn't want to separate it from the practice too much.
No, but that's from a teaching perspective. There are many designers in graphic design who have not seen any academy from the inside, who still practice very well, who ignore your approach, principles, methods, and processes completely, and are absolutely world famous. That's a different type of design that we are talking about here. And it's fine that these people make a fortune outside and are invited to give absolutely the pop star lectures. I'm not sure if that's suitable for the type of the information design and graphic design what we are talking about. Fundamentally user-centered, and fundamentally based on teamwork, and fundamentally based on multidisciplinarity.
To me, what is interesting that we are discussing design and research, as it would be different things, and that we don't discuss design and Photoshop as they would be two different things. Designers and Photoshop are the same thing. So why cannot research come also into the same bucket? I think before, when designers, we were only designing like very known and framed things like a poster, we could get away with our experience, our color sensitivity or whatever. But I think as problems become more and more complex and framed, ambiguous, and there are many other disciplines involved in the problem, it's really hard to say, oh, I know all the answers. I absolutely know what my audience needs and how to design that. So I think now is when the role of research becomes much more obvious that it has to be in that bucket. I think it was always there, but before, designers, we could just get away. We don't have to do it, but I think now it's as you have to do it. At least I wouldn't venture to start like a very big project without doing some sort of research to gain a better understanding of whatever I have to do. So I think the least we separate the two in the future, and the least we separate as two different things when we talk to students, the more everyone is coming to start saying, oh, everything is the same bucket. The toolkit, it has to include all of them. Yes, it can be time consuming. Yes, it's a new thing to teach and to learn, but someone I think said nothing is difficult if you know how to do it. It's just learning how to do one thing. No one knew how to use Photoshop or in design when we just had the tool, so it's getting used to. Sorry.
I can see this is a hot topic. We have on writing questions. We have Ken raising their hand, Meredith. So Ken and Meredith, go ahead. Then we read Don's question.
Yeah. I was just going to say that this is a historical moment, though, that we have to look at. Peter Scott writes about fields that have indeterminate standards and definitions for research, and they often arise because of some proximity to other fields that kind of invade what they do. And if you look at design has been in all kinds of different contexts within universities. They've been in art departments and engineering departments, And so the standards, I think, at the moment are a reflection of all those influences. And Scott talks about oftentimes the field is forced to make definitions and standards prematurely, that they don't allow it, it can't be allowed to evolve naturally as a discipline because there's some external pressure. And I think that's where we are in design. We recognize that the problems we're working on are complex. They require some sort of inquiry and research. And then we have all these influences on the evaluation of faculty and students and researchers that come from other fields. And we're just in a period, I think, where we're gonna have to let some of that settle through debate so that we begin to build some consensus across the field of the types of research and the standards that we apply to it.
Thank you, Marit. Ken.
Yeah, I want to say something where I'm going to partly disagree with Sheila. This notion that there was this era when people could just design stuff based on their experience that would really work isn't quite as good as it seems. I'll give you two examples. One of them is, I know a relatively famous design school that was celebrating their anniversary, and they wanted a series of posters that would make the school and its grandness visible to the world. So they asked the most famous, 8 of the most famous designers in the country where they were to each design a poster that would help make the school visible. And some of the posters didn't even include the school's name, and the posters that did, it was illegible. And then the other example that I think of, I remember when I lived in Norway, this sort of famous, vastly award-winning design firm was asked by a company that made essentially omega-3 vitamin capsules to design a jar that would be marvelous and evocative. So they designed this jar that looked tremendous. It was sort of sleek and oval, so it looked like a salmon swimming through the water. But when you took the top off, the way the neck was shaped was such that you couldn't pour a pill out of the bottle. You had to hold it upside down, and you'd always get too many. And, you know, if everybody in these 8 squares that we're all looking at each other has probably got a collection of dozens of examples like that. So I'd have to say that there may be some occasions in which senior designers with real experience, you know, people like Per Mollerup or Paul Rand could rely on that kind of standard. But a lot of this stuff that's produced doesn't work even for the older kinds of design.
I totally agree with you, Ken. I was not advocating for designers not needing to do research for a poster. I was saying that 20 years ago or whenever, it was not common practice to conduct research to do a poster. I'm a strong advocate for research, even to do anything. But some designers think, oh, it's a poster, it's easy. I know how to do it. So there's no need to go and talk to anyone. There's so many examples of poor designs in the world, from a poster to a train ticket to anything. I'm absolutely with you. I don't know, sorry if it was misunderstood my comment, but I'm absolutely with you.
We have a question from Don Norman, and he said, I think that there is still a confusion in this discussion between research that allows the development of appropriate products versus research that advances the field of design, its method and understanding. Who goes for that?
Well, that's
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's what I was referring to before, that, you know, sometimes you need research to inform decision-making in the practice. And other times you're concerned with building knowledge and theory that others can build on as kind of generalizable concepts for the field. And those, they just have different standards and different methods for accomplishing those things. And I would also argue a different kind of education to prepare someone to do that. You know, there is some dilemma, I think, in the field now about the difference between what's called practice-based research and doctoral study, PhD research that's really about theory building. And that controversy, I think, of what the standards are and what the education is that supports those different kinds of behaviors is something we haven't sorted out as a field yet. At the same time, I think we can start looking at some of the evidence that is being generated under those two different kinds of work. The kind of work that happens in the field that we can share when it's not proprietary and people are willing to do that. And the kind of work that is winding up in doctoral dissertations and academic investigations. One of the difficulties I think in the field right now is it doesn't really have a comprehensive database of research. In other fields you can find that. And so it's very difficult. If my doctoral students do a dissertation, you have to know an awful lot about that dissertation to find it in our library. So, and access is limited. So there are a lot of things right now that are part of an emergent research culture that, and I think the difference, clarifying those differences is part of that.
Sabine?
Yeah, I want to build on what Meredith has said, and as I can unfortunately attest is that yes, we have these indecisions in the field of design about these practice-based research and the doctoral education and all that. And, it's been an ongoing, since I started my own doctoral education, it's been a bit the same of the same. And the reason for that is that we have partially infrastructural issues, systems where maybe doctoral education is not even possible, because much of design still does happen in places and in schools where just by the frame and legal frameworks, it's not possible to pursue doctoral studies. That's number one. But also because it seems really still a bit of an difficult position for people in the field to come to terms with that. And the problem that I see and that I'm experiencing, and I can say that I was going to say that in the next section when I'm the discussant, but tomorrow morning I am part of a conference from the International Research Group on Public Management. And this is the second time that we have a panel on human-centered design. There was actually one last year in Duke as well that I wasn't able to attend. But so what I'm trying to say is, as we are struggling to come to terms, other fields are not shy about picking up these design conversations and these design issues. And they're beginning to frame them in their own way. And we have seen that happening with design thinking that came through management and was absorbed in its identification and its articulation and its form and shape mostly by managers and management scholars. And now we're seeing the same happening very rapidly on the public management side, I should say. And it's a problem. It's a problem for us because there is a conversation going on that has consequences for us as educators. It has consequences for us as researchers, but it most certainly has also consequences for practitioners. Because what we're seeing is that there are new fields of practice and research, and people are in these fields are striving to learn more about them. And they are running away and move forward with this. And we're sitting on the sidelines kind of trying to find out if we should get in the game or not. And that's really not a good situation. And I think, I don't know what it takes. Maybe we can agree here on what it takes to get into this. But let me also say, there was a 2-day conference this week, the OECD OPSI, Observatory Platform for Public Sector Innovation, where human-centered design and design per se, service design, you name it, all kinds of design was on the forefront. And in the final section last night, the key people actually stated the obvious, which, by the way, is a fast forward from the Bauhaus. Remember, Bauhaus and Ulm all happened in times of upheaval, in times when nothing could stay the way it was. Weimar Republic the time was a time of social progression. It was of technology upheaval. Everything came together, and we're finding ourselves again in these days and times. And it's not surprising that design is moving to the fore, and it's not surprising that on the EU level now there's talk about a European Bauhaus. So the question is, what are we doing here in the field to actually fill this with life and to make sure that design is really that we are really bringing the whole field with us into these discussions, conversations, and applications just as much. I'm sorry if I'm talking a lot.
No.
So sorry, I completely agree with you. And I think we need both kinds of research in this place. We need academic research to prove absolutely that design can provide a fundamental support for society problems, problems in society. And the second thing is we need design to make things to show that it works. I'll give you one example. A few years ago, it's always a team, were involved in developing the election forms in the Netherlands. 4% of the election forms are miscounted. 4.7%, which means in the House of Representatives, about 6 or 7 people lose their job immediately if they counted the forms correctly. We designed a form that could be scanned automatically through scanners, 0 mistakes. Unfortunately, the legislation had to be modified. So we did the research. We proved scientifically, statistically, absolutely clear, with scientific methods, without any doubt, that the forms needed to be redesigned. And based on that research, as well as the redesign of the form, we needed designers and researchers to do it. The legislation was changed to allow our redesigned election form to be permitted in the Netherlands. You need both the academic arguments as well as the design arguments. And if you can come up with a design proposal and say, here, it works already, it's here already, together with the academic data, the facts that academics, scientists approve of, you get a lot further.
Can I just chime in on that?
Conversation.
Pardon me?
Otherwise, we will not have time. We need to move to the other conversation.
Okay, let me just say one comment on Karel, because what I think is problematic is that Karel says that designers make some things, but if we have a policy maker, a policy is a product of design. They make things, and we don't do ourselves a service by constantly saying like, we'd make this form and then there is no design outside of design. That's exactly the problem. And actually right now the doors are wide open for us to come into these other areas of designing and to help them and to support and to complement. Thank you.
Good. Let us move to the other conversation. Thank you very much to the 4 of you for this hot topic. There are more questions in the Q&A. We will try to address them later, but I think we need to give room to this second discussion. I will ask very quickly to Denis, Matt, Sabine, and Saul to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, my name is Denis Weil. I am the Dean of the Illinois Institute of Technology Institute of Design. I'm teaching also area of civic design and design leadership. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly because I'm Swiss, which you probably hear in my accent. So I don't feel alone here when other Swiss are talking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Hi, hello everyone. I'm Matt Mayfield. I'm the Associate Dean and Lecturer at the Institute of Design. By my accent, I'm not Swiss, in case you were wondering.
I suppose I come next. I'm Saul Sitch. I'm a master's student at Hochschule Lucerne, and I'm finishing here in my last semester.
You are Canadian.
Right, and I'm German. I'm Sabine Junginger, and I'm heading the Competence Center of Design and the Competence Center Design and Management here at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. And yeah, that's all I need to say right now.
Good. And Sabine or Sol, do you have questions for or comments for Denis and Matt about their paper?
Yes, I do. I suppose I would like to start by just saying, it was refreshing to hear you talk about looking back at previous successes as you designed your curriculum, because like so much of this conversation has been talking about how volatile the world is and how fast things are changing, and you need to be looking forward, and design is always going this way. But it was really nice to hear it saying, let's build on the foundation that's been set forth already. But you talked about badging as a way of measuring the impact of your courses on students. So I'd love to hear more about that, if you could speak to it.
Sure, I could jump in on that one. So that is something that we are exploring. It's a difficult situation. Design in general, as I believe we all agree, is a holistic in nature. And the best designs are those that are really thoughtful in multiple kind of perspectives. And so the idea of badging we're looking for a way to better understand the competency of designers, and we're wondering if that might be a way for us to progress the curriculum forward so that we can have deeper conversations about what does it mean to be good at something in design. By no means have we figured it out yet, but we think there's something there that might allow us to move forward, might allow our students to become more proficient, perhaps more quickly.
Just if we can add to that, we also like the badging as a way of stackability, because we think that we have to make design less elitist. And it's kind of funny that comes from a graduate school of design, one of the few graduate schools. But we see much more, we do a lot of work with design in the community, and with this whole shift that we are seeing, that I believe, by the way, is an incredibly great situation for design right now, where I think design is shifting from being defined by authorship as an engagement model to being much more of a steward and an integrator. Those roles can be played by community organizers, as well can be played by other people. So the batching idea is a way to divvy up. You don't have to do a whole graduate degree and a whole undergraduate degree. You can get skills that will help you in your expertise that you are bringing, but do it better by adding some design competencies to it.
So do you have something else to add, or we move to Sabine?
Go ahead, Sabine.
Good.
I feel I've already talked so much. I've picked up on one aspect in your paper that is actually a very tiny kind of like side note. But look, if we're looking at the screen today, you mentioned diversity, and diversity in design to me is one of the key challenges for really advancing also design education and to move forward. In your paper, you say that you feel like you have a good, diverse group and crowd, but what does diversity then really mean? I mean, we see here, at least there's a gender balance tonight, but at the same time, when I look around, there's almost only white faces. And I would also argue probably rather strikingly similar social strata and all that. But how can we actually address diversity in education? And do you have any thoughts, or do you, you say you're concerned about that? What can we do about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, I need to put set some ground things in place. So we are graduate school only. We therefore are focusing less on the how. We assume that the students bring the how or learn it in our foundation program, and focus much more on the what, which was kind of the whole focus in human-centered design, but now more and more to why. So we are shifting, we have shifted our kind of centricity from kind of from empathy to really advocacy. So we are, as a graduate school, we are both blessed and cursed. The blessing part is that we can focus on the bigger things. Another blessing part is that we have a completely diverse, internationally diverse. We have over 13 countries out of 100. So we have over the time figured out how to integrate different cultures. We have not done as good a job as it comes to visual minorities on the domestic student side. We approached it about 3 years ago because as we shifted much more into civic design and community-driven design, realizing particularly, and second, we made a conscious effort when we moved back from downtown, where we had our own campus, to the university's campus, which is on the south side in Bronzeville, one of the most famous historic African-American areas in the United States, and made it a point that we wanted to work with organizations within 1 mile of the school, and realized that in order to do that, we needed to bring in faculty that has that expertise as well as that cultural understanding. So we engaged a former community organizer to actually come as faculty to lead our community-driven design. And that in itself has somehow resulted in now suddenly also having, of our domestic students, we are now at around 25%. So closely in line with the population of Black students. So it's not magic, it's very difficult, and obviously no way done. So we have a focus on anti-racist design, and that's actually again by the same professor. I think though it is, it's the key challenge, and one of the other things we did is connected with all the other universities, design universities, schools in Chicago, on really saying this is a design practice issue. And I think the underlying issue is that we have not communicated enough that you can make a good living with design. Design, I think, as Meredith mentioned, design still in non-designer terms is often linked to arts, and arts doesn't instill confidence that you will make a good living and be able to increase your socioeconomic situation. So I think that is changing through technology already, but I think we as schools have to also embrace that and promote that further, that's where our students go. I mean, it's not, they mostly work with technology.
Saul, do you have another question for them?
I do. I'm curious about, you talk about the, like, students presenting a polished version because they conflate refinement with critical thinking. I really like this point because I think it's a trap that so many of us fall into. And like, I know it myself, but so I'm wondering about ways that you fight against that. And specifically I was thinking back about this rich history that you talked about building up the program on the rich history. Do you find any link between those points?
Let me jump in here. I'm sure Denis has some thoughts too here, and it is a struggle. Again, it gets to what is our typical measures, and we've actually talked about this already a little bit with the prior discussion. How do we measure what is good design? What are we talking about when we say good, right? And it's so easy historically.
Oh, unmute.
Yeah, mute.
You Matt, yeah.
Mute, Matt.
I'm sorry, somebody muted me. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. So let me try this again. So I'm sure Denis has some additional thoughts here. But a lot of what that observation was about was, again, our effort as we were looking through our curriculum to figure out how do we talk about good design? What makes for good? And it's a big issue. And as we talked about in the previous conversation here as well, it's typically or historically was easier to look at the final product and the how refined it was, and that's a reasonable measure of goodness, but we know that's not everything, and it's not sometimes the most important thing. So as we work with our students, we try to stretch this out and actually start with conversations around, well, what are we trying to achieve? What are the objectives? How might we measure those objectives? So we can stretch that discussion around what is necessary here, what is appropriate, and all of the nuances around that, so that we avoid that trap of a singular kind of a measure of goodness, and try to break free of the historic measure of final polished pieces.
And I think that this ties into the shift that we see, another shift that we see, the shift away from products, designing products or solutions, to really designing interventions. And interventions need to be adaptable. And you need to actually also stay with them. So that's another change in the role of the designer, that we can't stop at the reveal. We actually have to be included in mobilizing for action and making sure that the intervention is adaptive. So I think the refinement, while we still like to have resolved designs, I think having a good resolved intervention is not the same thing as have a polished, very refined, beautiful object or beautiful artifact.
I would also say that not just interventions, but also ecologies. I mean, beginning to think about the relationships among products, services, information, tasks, settings. I mean, these are really complex relationships, and the focus on just the object ignores that kind of connection to other things. And more, I think we're beginning to think about ecologies as really the design outcome.
But do you think that an intervention excludes the ecology?
No. But I think that oftentimes the solution to something, or what you're stepping into, is an ecology. It's a relational understanding of lots of things that come together, and you can't look at that object in isolation.
Yeah, but intervention is addressing that ecology.
Right.
I completely agree, Meredith, and I think the reason why I isolated interventions to change a system is that when it's hard, you can't design an ecology, and also and I think I always compare social scientists and designers, because I'm really intrigued by that, because we have the same job descriptions. We try to understand a system and then do something to make it better. But social scientists do a very top-down looking at the whole system ecology. And I think our complementary approach is that we're looking for entry points that are more bottom-up. So we still try to understand the whole ecology, but we look kind of for those little docking and entry points we can get in. So I completely agree, but the intervention is what I think is the scope of what our product will be at the end.
Yeah, I think what the discussion of ecology gets to this issue of balance, and that you're seeking some sort of balance in that ecology through the intervention, to correct what was an imbalance in some way and bring it back into balance so that things function better. So those leverage points are places oftentimes where very small changes can produce enormous results in re-achieving a balance in that system.
Can I ask a question about, because Denis and Matt, Denis, you emphasized that you have a graduate program. And I'm wondering what that actually means for the wider design education. Meaning, there's two parts to these questions. The one is, what is it that you would like, design students who enter into your graduate program, what kind of competences should they have acquired in a bachelor level education? That's number one. And number two would be the question, what is it that you find when you actually take the real students that are entering into your program, and what are the, what is it, what you find, or how do you maybe even select them? So, but it's a bit of a reality check. So what is it that you would like to see? These competences on the bachelor level that need to be developed, and then what is it that you find maybe strengths and weaknesses right now? And yeah, that's my first part of this ongoing education question, but maybe we could learn something from you here.
Yeah, so we are modeled after professional schools, so like business schools, medical schools, so that are really only exist at the graduate level. So that's the model. So we're grounding ourselves in that model and then apply it to design. So using that model, 40% of our students do not have a design background when they come to our program, 60% do. And I think their experience, to describe their experience, and if you don't have a design background, you have to do a foundation program first to learn some of the basic design approaches. I think the best to describe it is that I think students will, depending on the background, they get different things out of our program. It's a little bit similar to the Masters in Architecture, where you have the 3-year Masters, which is somebody who doesn't have an architecture background, and they really learn become a licensed architect. In our case, people who don't come in with design are adding less the technical skills and more the mindset. And students who come in with a design background, using it more to deepen what they're interested in, both from a more strategy level practice, but also to just perhaps shift as well into expanding. What we're looking for is, ideally, we would like somebody who has at least 2 years professional experience, because we are strongly grounded in practice. So I didn't chime in the previous discussion that thanks to one of our directors from the 50s who really made that definition that we embracing design as a professional practice. The research we do, he defined this framework of that the way Jay Dublin, his research was is that you start with practice, you then take it into education, because you have to codify practice in order to educate it. And then through the education, you will actually discover new theories that are practice-based. And then you go backwards. You take those theories to take to education, and then education will influence the practice. And it's a continuous loop of where practice brings back new principles, new ideas that can then be solidified into theory and then go backwards in. So that's why we like the professional experience. What we're looking for mostly is curiosity and leadership evidence. And we like, the other thing we're looking for is to create a community that is very diverse, also from the background point of view. So we shape to a certain extent every year. So we like people who have done something that is absolutely nothing to do with design, because so we have a lot of social scientists now getting computer science students, which is exciting, coming to us. So I think that's that. And I think Matt leads our admission program, so he perhaps can give some additional, more specific competencies.
Yeah, I was going to just build on that. Absolutely, curiosity is by all, that really is an underpinning of what makes for good design students. It's certainly in our program, I would imagine, in the field. The other thing I would add to that, the curiosity, the leadership, is that for design, there is we find at least the students that do the best or do get the most out of the program are those that are comfortable with ambiguity and change. So because design, our definition of design is that, right? That we are wanting to change the world, and for our students to be able to put those proposals out there, to be able to envision possibilities, allows us to really move forward. So it's a very deep conversation of insight and what it will take to make change, to Denis's point earlier about interventions, coupled with the ability to envision, not perfectly, like not predict the future, but just help everyone else imagine what it could be like if it were different. So those are the qualities that we look for. As Denis said, it comes across in lots of different ways from lots of different programs. It is not necessarily designer only. And that's what makes we are blessed in that we have a very vibrant community of students, because with that commitment to curiosity, envisioning, and leadership, we're able to explore and leverage each other's backgrounds towards that.
I just wanted to ask, I'm going to speak a little bit from a student's perspective, in that sometimes you feel like a rat in a maze that's being looked at, and that you can only go to the next piece of cheese, and you're being rewarded for that. And it's simply because you get your syllabus and you get your outcomes, and then have you pursued this outcome, and then you go to that piece of cheese and you go to the next one. But and so I'm wondering, how often do you explicitly tell your students about the overall outcome of the entire program, of that, by 2 years, this is what we're hoping to shape you into and kind of mold you into, and so rather than just just one piece of the syllabus that, okay, now you've learned this competency, now you've learned this competency, and you kind of go like this versus kind of the guiding them through. So is my question relatively clear?
I got it. Let me jump in again. I'm sure everyone else has some thoughts too. And that goes back a little bit to the badging conversation too. We have to be careful when we kind of start to separate and isolate parts and pieces that we miss that larger context. We do a lot of advising in our school. It's one of the things that we're proud of. All of our full-time faculty do advising. We don't let that off to somebody else. And through that relationships, we use that to help students place their education. We do have a challenge in that our students have different areas that they want to focus on, that they want to practice on. So there isn't one answer, but there is a continual conversation around what are you doing here with your education? What are you looking to learn? How will that add to your ability as a designer? That is often what we encourage in our advising discussions. It's one of the reasons why we wrote this paper as well, is to better explain ourselves around what is this particular program, what do we get out of it, and how might students think about their education as they go through. So absolutely agree. We do get that question time to time from students of, what am I doing here? Where am I? And so we hope through a conversation engagement, we're able to help them. But it is, it's an individual journey for many students.
Our course catalog looks much more like, again, a professional school versus a design school. It's 3/4 electives for our students. We offer 40 courses a semester for a student body of 120. And it's based on, for people who haven't read the paper, it's based on that we believe nowadays we live in an intangible economy. That same is true for skills. Designers need intangible skills and tangible skills. The intangible skills are the more important one because they are about mindset and approach. And we think that today design, as Sabine said, design is needed very much. And if the president of the European Union even makes the call for that and sees that, we should be bold and aggressive and ambitious and not feeling like we are being misunderstood. When I was in design school at ID 20 years ago, every conversation led back to proving the value of design. I was at the keynote speaker at the service design conference 3 years ago, and the discussion still went on. And I was the ending speaker, and I basically told people, we have to stop that. We have no longer have to prove the value of design. Everybody wants design. They don't understand design, but they know that they want it. And what we now have to do is figuring out how we can deliver the value for all those different applications and organizations. And I see this as a natural maturing of a practice. The same thing happened to finance. We are relatively young practice. Chief finance officer, finance just became a strategic discipline when the computer, when they actually could get results instantly. So part of that shift into this next thing is that we need domain knowledge, and somebody already referred to that. So one of the things designers need, that's more in the tangible skills, if they want to go into healthcare, which about 20% of our students do, they need to get experience at school in healthcare. They need to learn the language, as Sabine said. But, so I think that's the important part. But we think that the 3 unique skills that only design can bring to help solve those big issues that we have and to advance humanity is, number 1, help tame complexity. We can make things tangible. We can put things into maps. We can grasp and help people to understand the complexity, and we can identify entry points for change. The second thing we can do, channel creativity. And that's not our own creativity. That's the knowledge and creativity of these multifunctional teams, of communities, of leaders. But we can, through our prototyping ability, through our facilitation ability, we can help teams to actually get bigger and better ideas. And then third, and very importantly, and that is new, that's something we added new to our program 2 years ago, is mobilizing actions. You never thought that designers are in action. We need to be in action. We need to roll up our sleeves, and we need to leave our pedestal where we think ourselves as magicians and dress in black and go to the reveal and leave. We need to be like any other professional practice. Part of maturing is to become a little bit more humble and give up different, not pretending that we are that different. yes, we have unique skills to bring and we need to be about those, but otherwise we are professional expertise, like many other professional expertise. And part of that is to be part of the action and help implement it. And we think that this is more important than ever, is the role of integrator, that in the development and execution, designers are perfectly positioned to be integrators, to basically ensure, be stewards of purpose, to ensure that the vision that the team had or the organization had or the leaders had and the execution are pretty close. That it's called the intent and effect gap in Silicon Valley, that we don't get many more Facebooks, we don't get the unintended consequences. So those are the three intangible skills. Sorry, I said no.
Very well spoken. Thank you, Denis. And Matt. It's very good.
Ken first, then Sabine.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a really interesting point to position something that Denis said against something that Meredith said earlier. You guys both used the word practice, but you used it in very different ways, which are not always visible. When Meredith is talking about practice-based research, especially for PhD theses, a lot of this stuff isn't really practice-based research. It's projects by studio people who have never actually been out in practice. The vast majority of studio design teachers haven't really worked as professional designers. Maybe they did a year or two of internship. They didn't really do so well at it. Then they got themselves a job teaching design at a university. And if they were lucky for themselves, they wound up getting into a full-time position. They got tenure. And so they've never done any real practice. When Denis was talking about practice, he's talking about a rich interaction between the design profession and design education, which also has a research cycle built in. Now, of course, I actually know there really are people who are both practitioners and design teachers. Meredith is a great example. Stephen McCarthy up in Minnesota is a great example, Jauko Muratovsky. But by and large, when you hear about practice-based research, you're really hearing about stuff that works in an MFA thesis and nowhere else. So I just wanted to distinguish that you two guys used the same word, but they had very different meanings. And I think actually Meredith would like to hear more people and see more people doing what Denis talks about, as I would also.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between practice referring to the making of something and practice referring to the kind of problem solving that you see in the profession, and you know what the evidence is of those two different kinds of practice. I mean, the practice-based PhD programs are often artifacts substituting for dissertation. The notion that the object is somehow knowledge, you know, those are kind of the premises of the programs that are built around that idea about research. And that's very different. You know, a lot of my doctoral students are studying the practice as the subject matter of their dissertations, but they're not making objects as replacements for that kind of analysis. So yes, there's a difference. It's very difficult, I think, to decode all that language.
Yeah, and Meredith, our PhD also, as you know, have a PhD program, and our PhD program is similar to the what you described yours, except that what we're asking them to do is actually develop new methods. Mm-hmm. So we want them to study kind of at the frontier, the emerging fields. And so we just had a student finishing who basically felt that design needs to bring, particularly community-based design, needs to bring wandering in, the wonderment, and brought in this idea of patterns, patterning as a new method, but then tried it out with community groups. So I think because we are so methods-oriented, mm-hmm. we look at PhD as developing new methods as a way to contribute to the field. Still
yes. I would like to come back to what Denis listed as the three distinguishing characteristics, I suppose, of designers or the skilled designer. And I would like to refer back to Richard McKeon, actually. Some of you may know Richard McKeon. He's been a student of John Dewey's, and he was also very well the kind of designer that we would like to see today. He was a co-founder of the UNESCO, and he has very much dealt with issues of design. And I find that the way that he describes it, and of course he doesn't say design, but I think the way in his piece, which is about communication, truth, and society, he explains better than anyone what designers do. And what I find the role of designers, as we are talking about interventions and actions in today's environments. And these are three aspects, so also three. And it's first of all, let us remember that most of the time when designers are called onto the field, it's about because somebody has a problem and they can't find their way out. It's a little bit like the what is it, the capture room, the room where you kind of like caught in and you don't know where the door is and you don't know where and what, and you have to kind of like adventure rooms, I guess it's called, and you have to find your way out. That's when designers come in. And designers, and again I'm using now the words of McKeon, their first job is to kind of create, figure out these nuances and differences. So what he says is it's about discovering ambiguities, about everything that's fixed, everything is fixed. It looks like a shelf, it looks like a table, everything is fixed. But where is it that maybe it could be something different? What could it be? And that is this first task of discovering ambiguities, because when you can figure out that a chair is maybe not a chair, but maybe a stepping stone to something else, or maybe that a door is not a door, but maybe a picture. If you can discover these ambiguities, that's when you can do the second step. And the second step is about inventing possibilities. Because once you've seen that something is not what it seems, or what you thought it was, or that it could be something different than what you have actually ascribed it to, that's when you can start inventing possibilities. And once you have mastered inventing the possibilities, you can then go and you can manifest these findings and these possibilities. You can express values, and we do that. This is exactly what designers do. We come in, we discover ambiguities, that's our skill, we invent new possibilities, and then we manifest them in new products and services, which in McKeon's word is we give them expression. We express these new values. And when we start talking about it like this, it is all of a sudden so simple, and you understand that this is a skill, because it takes all of that which you have mentioned before, Denis, and much of what you're talking about in your paper, Matt and Denis, because you need to understand people, you need to understand organizational systems, you need to do research into these different elements, and you need to figure out a way to bring it together. And you also need to have a process to understand when, how, why something comes in. And so that to me is what I find very worthy, and also highlights again that maybe when we talk about design foundations and design theories, we have to not be afraid of going outside the classics and embracing that.
I agree, and Sabina, what you just said reminds me of I think an article from publication 2 years ago from OECD, Cities as Playground for Innovation. And I used that actually to shape my civic design class. They identified 3 core things, mostly around policymaking, but also obviously services, that needs to happen to succeed in public innovation at city level. First one is through participation with stakeholders, which is the whole co-design aspect. But I think that's it's kind of the research aspect, but it's done in a co-design way. The second one is to then capture those insights into inspirational future that all stakeholders, multi-stakeholders, different stakeholders can actually say, yes, this is what we want to work towards. I think that's these possibilities that you just talked about. And I think that's, again, this idea of designers uniquely being qualified to make these community ideas tangible and building support around it. And the last one is the one I think that's the biggest stretch for designers, but we have to get into, and you mentioned it already, which is the demonstrating the public value. So that's when it goes, and we have talked before in the previous group about evidence and also using a language of residents and of public benefit. And I think the example that Karel brought on the voting example was a clear example on how to do that. But I think those are, to me, those are also another look into what I think design could really have. First, the first two, design, I think, is uniquely qualified. I think the third, design, needs to be versatile in the language to understand that needs to happen.
I have a question from Karen Schreiber, and we go back to research, but I will invite all of you to answer. It said, Karel's point about the need for replicability in design research is important. There are at least two ways to think about that. On the one hand, we would like to know that the particular result from a design study could be replicated by another researcher. On the other, we would like to know that general findings from one study might be found and repeated and extended by another. I would say that neither of these ways have been practiced in design work. I would say the same for research on writing and plain language. So, who goes for that? Sabine.
Yes, and actually Axel Vogelsang, our colleague from the HSLU here, another head of a competence center, visual narrative, is speaking more to my point. We should not fall in the optimization and scientification trap that marks other fields and that are important to other fields. But it is a fallacy to believe that a design solution will be replicable by other people, because when we deal with design, we are concerned with a specific problem, particular people, a specific situation, context. So and all that, and we bring our own particular experiences and ideas and circumstances to the fore. And it would be a sad day when all design would end up in the same result. The benefit and the beauty about design is that there is variety, possibility, and very different interpretations that we can actually, think very differently about the very same situation, the same problematic situation, and come up with many different ideas to address that. And the challenge is for us not so much about the replicability, but about to develop validity through criteria that are applicable to that specific situation and that can generate evidence in this particular content that holds to be true in that particular case, and that depends on so many different things that I maybe I misread the question, but I am very careful to not go down that path, because and in this case, I would go down to John Dewey's work on the theory of logic and the pattern of inquiry, where we can see that there is a reason and a rationale, and there's a logic in a design solution, but these logics are different from they are arguments in their own way, and just like you can be a lawyer in the court and have the same kind of defendant and the same kind of circumstantial evidence, there may be different ways to interpret that story, and it will depend on how to tell that story persuasively, convincingly, and then fill it with that evidence that carries the weight for that argument. That would be my thought on that.
Okay, We are on time, and Matt and Denis have to leave on time because they have other commitments. So I will invite them to say their final thoughts, and we can, or the rest of us can stay to address the Q&A questions. So Matt and Denis.
Sure, I'll start, Dennis, if you don't mind. So again, thank you all very much for allowing us to share what we're up to and to hear what everyone else is up to. This is very, very important, not just for us, but for the field. And we certainly encourage continuing these discussions to understand, how do we make this better? How through education, through the field, how do we improve? And the only way we know how is to continue to share our knowledge. So we certainly invite everybody to join us over, at our website and take a look at what we have to share. And we will certainly do the same to any invitations extended to us.
Great. Matt, would you like to share the link of the website in the...
Yes, I will do that right now. Yes.
I might not know. But Denis.
Thank you for including us in the conversation. It was a pleasure talking and discussing with all of you. I just want to leave you saying I think this is an very exciting time for design. I think the world is open to us. Like any exciting time, we have to figure out how to get to it. I think your last question, on not having clear language or not simple language to understand. I think the challenge we have now is good design speaks for itself. So once you work with a team and you do things, they see it. And once they've seen it, it works. But we have a problem in talking about how the value we can bring. And I think that I'm starting with that. We are working with the communications firms on that to help us with that. So that's kind of number one. And then for the students who are on here, I just want to tell you, you have chosen a great field. Think big. The world needs you. And there is so many different areas. Design is maturing, and I'm sure if you are still familiar with the T-shaped model that IDEO promoted, which is you need to be deep in design but broad across the board, this is no longer relevant. I think it's a pie shaped, like the Greek letter pi. You need to be strong in design and something. That can be design and technology, design and business, if you listen to John Maeda, or it can be design in the domain. So design in healthcare, design and finance, design or civic government design. So I would encourage you to think your career and your education that way, that you would need the design and something else. That's the powerful combination. So thank you, everybody, and pleasure being here.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here. Right. So we have an answer now from Karen. I missed it. Wow. Karen, did you delete your question or your comment?
No, I answered actually to her, and I'm wondering if that did anything. Oh, because it said answered. Maybe it's in the answered part. Because, well, I don't know. It's still there. She clarified that she was not thinking about, that she was not thinking about the solution itself to be replicated, but about the insights and the learnings that people would have about the people involved in the projects, and I actually wrote back that yes, I agree with that. So, but I don't know if I by commenting on that, if maybe I deleted it. I hope not.
No, it is in the answers. So Karen says, by the result, what I meant is not the artifact or the design solution, but rather what is learned about the people. And Sabine said, okay, I agree with that. Sheila, you want to say something?
I was just going to say that I thought the question was pointing to replicating the study itself, so the data gathering part, not the design solution, because data can be interpreted in many different ways. I mean, the response from a designer could take many different forms, but what should be replicable is the research study itself. At least you should be able to follow the steps that the researcher follow and gather data. That doesn't mean that you're going to gather the same data
Okay, that is a linguistic issue here because again, when we talk about research and when we're using the term replicable, it triggers this idea that you follow the scientific paradigm of doing the same kind of replicable study. So maybe the term replicable is not the right term here. Maybe what you said in the other way, that you say it should be there's a, you know, similar to what I explained, the logic to it, and somebody should be able to follow the steps through the research. That's a different argument. And we just, I mean, I have absolutely that I would say is important and a requirement. But again, that talks about the logic and the coherence, the internal and external validity of a particular research approach. It does not talk about a scientific, you know, replicability. Even if you take the same steps, when you take a different, you know, you never enter the same water twice or something like this. So even if you do the same thing, it may not happen the same way.
I would say the literature call it replicable. Maybe don't take it like so literal that you need to get the exact data, but it talks about the steps.
Actually, disagree on that.
I didn't create the term in any case.
It's okay to disagree. Karen answered, yes, that is right, to the first comment, Sabine, and then she said exactly, Sheila, the response differs, but we should have some data that is replicable. Karel, I was seeing you saying, you want to say something?
No, I'm just reading.
Okay. You prefer to stay away from me.
The thing is, my whole, very, very crudely, I design in the morning and I interview people in the afternoon. That's my pattern of working. So all the time I try to figure out how I can inform people by making things in the morning, and then with a complete team of all sorts of people. And then in the afternoon, I'll usually do the interviews myself. And there's never been an interview in the last 25 years where I could actually predict what would come out. So yes, the method is completely repeatable. I can teach and I train interviewers to follow and to start asking the same questions. And the results they get are completely different from mine. Mm-hmm. Brilliant, because that means we can design for different groups and we can actually use those differences to make a variation in solutions without excluding the largest groups. Because other people, if a 25-year-old young lady interviews the same people as I do, we get different answers. Mm-hmm. Which is that the method, the approach, the standards are the same, but the results are very, very different. And what Sheila says, that you have to interpret those results from a design perspective. Yes, exactly, but that's what we're trained for.
Thank you. We have a question from Marina Manuel, and she said, hello, thank you. It's a long message. So thank you for this remark about encouraging graphic design students to get in contact with the users, stakeholders, early on in the process. Coming from graphic design myself, I'm now working in the field of industrial design education. Did I lose something?
No, that's okay.
And now working in the field of industrial design education, I came to realize that this step, consulting, observing, working together, is traditionally integrated in the design process of the education of industrial design students, depending on the school. So my question is graphic design lagging behind in the training of involving users target group in the research plus design? And if yes, what can we learn from other akin design disciplines and their methodologies? In a broader perspective, how willing, prepared is graphic design to open up to other design principles, or in fact, to other scientific fields for cross-fertilization of design plus research methodology?
I think Meredith is absolute world expert in this area. I'm sorry about that, but your view.
I would say, I mean, historically, we've been removed from watching. You know, it's hard to watch what somebody's thinking. And we've been removed from making the object, putting it out there in the world, and then somebody interacting with it. It's not like you can put it in a human factors lab, you know, and know what's going on in somebody's head very easily. So So I think the methods are a little different, but certainly as important to develop. You know, I'm kind of intrigued about where we borrow from, and Julie Thompson-Klein has looked at the issue of interdisciplinarity, and she says that there are really three forms out there. One is about bridging two fields, and you can see that in something like design anthropology, or you know, the application of design management, for example, I think is a good bridging example. Another is a kind of shared interest in a common topic. And so we share an interest in design thinking with business now. But the third is really about reconfiguring organizing principles and methods in various fields that are quite different from their origins. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of in graphic design right now, is that kind of reconfiguration. So when you talk about research, that's not something we typically did in the 70s. You know, it was more intuition and based on, you know, the kind of information that you have from practicing a long time. The entry to the field was different. You know, you entered in a kind of technical support role. You gradually got to help somebody else with the creative ideas. And if you were really good at it and stuck at it long enough, you would move into the kind of strategy development that somebody might have about communication. But all of that's been reconfigured. And I think we're now kind of moving into other areas that are not as familiar. And it's going to take a while to figure that out. And I think they are different from industrial design. You know, there's no product development counterpart in graphic design education. You know, despite the fact that we're developing digital products now. And so students graduate without that kind of product development experience. And there's just, you know, a complete kind of, I think initially we thought the reconfiguration was really about production. But it's really about what things mean, how they mean, the kind of rules of the game in terms of how people interact with information. And that's moving very quickly, and I think we're working to catch up.
Thank you, Meredith. We have one more question, is for Jan Ecker. He said, again, it's a long one. Given that the new European Bauhaus has been mentioned several times tonight, a problem I see with Ursula von der Leyen call for a new European Bauhaus is that there is a lot of talk about new building materials or sustainable energy, perhaps also because there is a big industry behind these terms. Sure, these are important elements of both the digital and green transition, but most of these industries or projects are trying to cope with the symptoms of what mainly is caused by human behavior. Here is where I see a big opportunity for design and education to contribute to an idea such as the new European Bauhaus. How do we educate future generations to act and behave in a more planet-centered way? And that might mean to integrate evidence-based research and strategic foresight into design education, focusing on what impact design interventions might develop in both human behavior and the human being's environment, which is not a new idea, considering great thinkers like Tomás Maldonado and Victor Papanek. So, who goes for that one?
I can say a few things. I know that as we're speaking, the process of building this European Bauhaus is well underway. And you have key players from Denmark, the UK, Finland, most of them on the practice side, because it builds on those people who have so far advised the EU Commission on, let's say, creative economy issues or design leadership. That has been going on for the last decade, so to speak. And so there are these ideas that are feeding in. And what I mentioned earlier this evening was me reaching out to some of these people, because I still want to see the research also represented here and acknowledged and as one thing. And so I think that I mean, this is something that is happening, like I said, right now, and designers will have a role in that to move that forward. There's another question that I've been kicking back and forth with some people aside, because the new European Bauhaus, of course, comes out of this idea that we're looking for new cohesion within the EU, the European Union. So it's a direct, you could almost argue, response, but at least along those lines, an effort to foster new trust in government, but also foster new trust in the EU institutions, in the idea of the EU. And that for that reason, we need a different kind of thinking and doing in many ways. And again, we're seeing now design-led interventions on, EU policy labs. I've been involved in some of those. There is and again, the OECD conference yesterday that underlines that human-centered design actually is not something that only we designers talk about, but actually policymakers, civil servants across different countries. So that is all underway, but it still doesn't solve our problem. And I think Jan is putting the finger on the wound here. Where is it and how is it that we actually prepare this next generation designers to make a contribution here and to advance this? But the idea that I was actually mentioning was different and it goes beyond the EU because the question then is, what does it mean, a European Bauhaus? And when you know that India and China has very much built their design programs around the Bauhaus and about the Ulm School, then what kind of what are we setting up here? And how does that actually weave through the larger landscape of design education? So these are just thoughts, and I'm not sure that they're very helpful, but that's what I could contribute.
Good. Thank you very much. We need to close, so I will invite Ken to say some final words.
Well, I've enjoyed all these three conversations. I have to say, tonight, partly because we're sort of getting used to the format and developing ways to work, I thought tonight's was much richer and more engaging as a group conversation. So I was very pleased to be here and to participate. All of the articles in Gwil's two specialists of Sheiji have been good, and all the writers and speakers have been good, but I enjoyed the meeting tonight, especially well. Once again, I want to thank everyone who was here, and I want to thank Gwil for organizing this. So that's it for me. Thank you all.
A pleasure. I agree with Ken. I think it has been a terrific conversation. I would like to close by resonating the words of Denis Weil, and he said that there is hope for students, right? Design is much, much needed. And I think that the message for both practitioners and the ones teaching design is that we really need to work on how are we teaching right now, what are we doing. The reality is that the world is changing faster than the availability of our curriculum. Those 5 loops or 10 loops years is no longer working. So that's one of the things we need to address very quickly, because we need to be more adaptable to the change. Actually, that's one of the things that we design promote. So we need to start doing that. It's difficult, it's an effort, but we have to start doing that. That is essential. Thank you very much to all of you for writing the papers, for participating today, and to the students. This is a good discipline and it's very much needed today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillermina and Ken, for everything.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Bye, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.